Welcome to Up All Night DIY. I'm Monica. Thanks for joining me. Dawn of Shabby Meets Bling and I are hosting the Longing for Fall collaboration, where you'll find fun autumn and Halloween themed DIYs. We're joined by some of our favorite creator friends. I'm going to link Dawn's channel along with a link to the playlist in the description box. Of course, I'm going to be bringing you a papier-mâché Halloween project, so let's get into it. I found this papier-mâché egg-shaped deal in a bag of tins and other doodads that was given to me. Thought that I'd use this for today's Halloween character, Grim the Gremlin. And I've been collecting scads of these candle jar lids because they always come in handy. We will be covering this one with some Model Magic air dry clay. We will also be using some 3-in-1 glue and other glues and some other doodads and whatnot. You know what, let's cut to the chase and get started. Since this was a papier-mâché piece, I have mixed up some papier-mâché clay. I'm using Activa Celu clay. You can see what it looks like up here in the corner, that bag. I use a food processor to mix the clay. I'm going to link a video showing the process because I won't be showing it here. It takes up too much time. Anyway, now I want old Grimm here to wear a hat. So what I've done is sanded down a flat spot. I basically sanded that pointy part of the egg down so that the hat will sit nice and flat. And I'm going to be making the hat from this Dollar Tree peat pot and just a cardboard circle that I cut. Now the texture of the peat pot, it's good stuff. I'm digging that, so I'm going to leave that as is. But I will apply a thin layer of Joe Sonia texture paste onto the cardboard circle. You could also use drywall spackle, or I really could have covered it with some of the papier-mâché clay, but the clay takes a long time to dry. So you know what? The texture paste it is. I'm going to fill in the holes on the edge of the cardboard here first. Then I'll add a wispy layer of the texture paste to the top and bottom of the cardboard. This texture paste dries like in 20 minutes, so much quicker. There is just loads of texture on this papier-mâché egg, which again, I'm digging. So I'm going to jump right in with applying some fresh papier-mâché clay to create his features. I did go ahead and draw a couple of circles where I want Grimm's eyes to go, and I'm going to use my palette knife to apply a thin layer of clay around the circles. Really just want to get it on there, and then we'll shape it, etc. Basically, I'm creating a raised ring around the eyes with the clay. And I'm going to implement a paintbrush to shape it and clean up the edge. I'm not going to worry too much about the smoothness because I really like that gritty texture, but you know, that is personal preference. So as you can see, I'm just grabbing some of the papier-mâché clay and outlining around the circle of the eye. And again, I'm going to use that paintbrush, it's nice and damp, to manipulate the shape and clean up the edge. And of course, we're going to repeat that on the other eye. I sketched on a wee smile that spans from eye to eye. We will build up the mouth in the same way that we did the eyes. We want that raised edge to outline the mouth. And once again here, the paintbrush is my friend. It makes moving the clay around nice and easy. Okay, so I am grabbing a wad of clay, and I'm going to shape a cheek just under the eye. Once again, using both my fingers, but mainly that damp paintbrush to do the trick. This is really the first time that I've used papier-mâché clay for this kind of detail. Previously, I used it more to just cover a surface. It is definitely a different vibe from air dry clay, but you know, we'll see how it looks when all is done and said. You feel me? I grabbed another wad of clay and rolled it around to make it round to create his nose. Once again, I'm going to continue to use my brush to shape it. And I'm going to add another smaller round ball of clay under his mouth to create a chin. Again, using my brush to shape it. And when I'm happy with it, I'm going to set him aside for 2 days to dry. That is the one bummer about this papier-mâché clay. It takes a long time to dry. In the meantime, I'm going to grab my Model Magic clay and that candle jar lid. I'm going to use this as a base for Grimm's head. but I want to cover it with the Mache clay first. This is going to give me a much better edge to glue him to, and it'll be easier to attach the festooning to it as well. You know what I mean? So I'm flattening some of the clay, and I'm going to drape it over the lid, pressing it on there, and I'll cut away any excess, and then that's going to need to sit to dry overnight. We are still a day away from Grimm being ready. However, we can work on his accessories. We have his hat pieces, this papier-mâché box that he will sit atop, and the clay-covered jar lid base. I'm going to apply 2 coats to the exterior and interior of this peat pot, and a couple of coats to the cardboard circle, which of course is the brim of his hat, and really to the clay-covered jar base as well, and also to the papier-mâché box. So everything I just showed you here is going to get at least 2 coats of the charcoal. Our man Grimm is finally dry and ready for paint. It looks like his nose and his cheeks flattened out a wee bit during the drying process, but you know, it is what it is. I've got no issues with that. We're going to make it work. Old Grimm here is going to get 2 coats of Americana Sage Mint, which is this very vintagey green. It's not quite as dark in person as it looks here on screen, but it is a very pretty, very vintage green. I paint the eyes with Ceramcoat Bittersweet Orange, a color that I absolutely love, but I can't find anymore. I'm going to do 2 coats, you know, as we do. And now we are going to add some concentric circles to the eyes, using charcoal first. I'm applying with a sponge dauber, so I'm just going to dot in his eyes. Good stuff. When they're dry, our next circle will be this warm white, which is a mix of Americana Oyster Beige and plain old white acrylic paint, and I'm going to apply it with the end of my brush handle here. Oop. Right there, lining up with the bottom of the charcoal circle. There we go. And now back to charcoal, using a smaller dowel to kind of make his, I guess his pupil, right? So once again, right there lining it up with the bottom of the white. And finally, I'll give the eyes a small highlight with the warm white. Filling in his mouth with charcoal as well. I was debating whether to add teeth, but decided, nah. And I'm just cleaning up the very edges of the mouth here with a detail brush. We will be dry brushing his features, first with Folk Art Thicket, which is a deep vintagey green in the vein of forest green. I start lightly dry brushing around the edges of the eyes, building the depth of color by adding multiple layers. Then I will move on to the cheeks, nose, and mouth, and of course his chin, which I did almost forget. I'm coming back in and going over top of the Thicket dry brushing and adding Americana Spiced Pumpkin dry brushing to that, because that's how I roll. Of course, this is a personal taste thing, but I love that mottled look of multiple colors. I feel it gives a very retro, vintage vibe. Grimm is getting thicket eyebrows and some character lines, or la lashes, whichever you prefer to think. And a thicket line here on his eye, just for kicks. His cheeks and nose will get warm white swirls, and I'm also going to add highlights to the character lines and to the brows. Real quick, I'm grabbing my flooding medium. We will shade the inside perimeter of his eyes with Americana Burnt Orange. I'm prepping my brush, getting a healthy coat of the medium on the bristles, scooping the burnt orange paint onto the corner of my brush, side loading, and stroking the brush on my plate to blend the medium with the paint. I hold the paint corner of my brush where I want my darkest shadow, right along the edge of the eye here, and I'm going to float around the eye, laying down my shading. This is another personal preference thing, and I feel like this really adds some age and a vintage feel to this piece, but totally up to you. And of course, if you don't want to attempt the floating, you could always just dry brush around the inside edge of the eye. And since we have it on the go, let's add some of that float to the inside of the mouth too. Once again, holding the paint corner to the edge. Onto Grimm's hat. I'm going to add warm white checks along that top edge of the peat pot with a small flat brush. I'm going to repeat that around the edge of the brim, carrying it down over the rim. Now I'm going to load that same brush with a wee bit of the spiced pumpkin, and in a painterly fashion, I'm going to brush over the checks. I want some of the white peeking through the orange. I went through some of my Halloween paper doodads from previous years and was lucky enough to find this licorice wafer vintage label, which will go right here on our box. However, I'd like to bring some of the sage mint into play here, so I will dry brush the edge of the label with this paint. I really just want a hint of that green. I also found this Halloween paper medallion amongst my stash, so I'm going to add a wee bit of the green to that as well, because I think I'm going to use this to adorn his hat. Now let's pull some of that orange and some of the sage onto the papier-mâché box. I'm just going to dry brush mostly around the edges. This time, I'm going to start with the orange, and then I'll move on to the mint. I'm going to add some of the dry brushing to the jar lid as well, simultaneously. Here you can see the reason I chose to do the orange dry brushing on the box first is because the sage is coming up much lighter, so I just thought it added a nice highlight. And we want to add some of that dry brushing to the elements of the hat as well. Now I can start with the assembly process, and I'm going to start with 3-in-1 glue applied to the back of the licorice label. We'll get that completely around the perimeter of the label and get it attached to our box. I did spray the box with clear matte sealer once the label was attached. I came across a small piece of Halloween festooning that already has some green in it. I must have made this last year, and it's like the perfect amount, so that saved me some time. If you want to see how I make the festooning, I'll link my shakers video, which shows you at the very beginning how to make it. And I'm just going to use my 3-in-1 glue to trim out the edge of the jar with the festooning, and I'll cut away any excess. To assemble the hat, I'm going to use both the 3-in-1 glue as well as a wee bit of hot glue to attach the peat pot to the brim, like so. And before we go any further with the assembly, I want to add a finishing top coat of multi-purpose sealer to Grimm's head. I'm using this Deco Art product, applying it with a cosmetic sponge, just pouncing it on. This will add a protective coat as well as a nice finished appearance. If you don't have this particular product, Mod Podge is a really good alternative, or again, a clear matte sealer spray will work as well. And we want to add a coat of that sealer to our hat also. I'll be using both the 3-in-1 glue and the hot glue to attach Grimm's hat to that flat spot on his head. And I'm adding a bead of 3-in-1 around the jar lid to affix his head to the lid. I added what was left of the festooning around the paper medallion, and I'm going to attach that to his hat, and then all we need to do is pop him on top of the papier-mâché box, and he's finished. Shall we take a final look at Grim the Gremlin? I feel like Grimm has a really authentic vintage vibe to him. I'm digging the texture on his face. I love when I find bits and bobs that come together. And I gotta tell you, I almost threw away the piece that I used to make his head, because I wasn't really sure, what it was made of, or if it was solid, what was going on there. So, needless to say, I'm glad I thought twice about that. I do enjoy working with the papier-mâché clay. However, I find the dry time a wee tad prohibitive for me. The other clay that I use dries, far quicker. Anyway, I had fun with Grimm. Let me know what you think. Please be sure to check out the amazing Dawn's channel, Shabby Meets Bling. And please hit up all of the videos on the playlist for Fab Fall and Halloween DIYs. Show everyone some love. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and all that good stuff. Stay creative, my friends. Thanks for hanging with me. See you next time. Up all night with Monica.